six, Kyle.
So U6 is basically the way they collect different data for unemployment. It's like the most accurate unemployment number. What you usually hear of as like the average unemployment, um, that's that's only part of the story. But the U6 is basically about double that, and that gives you a lot more information. Um, so what that means is a third of people in this country are food insecure. It's like 120,000 families in LA are expected to be homeless if there's not like government intervention. So on the local level, what I would like to see is an extension of the eviction moratorium, which it sounded like, Bruce, you said that was until September. So that's good. But in the long term, we don't know how long this crisis is going to last. And there's a lot of people that are going to suffer, especially the most vulnerable in the community.
All right. So in 5 years from now, what would you like to be different than today?
Well, that's a difficult thing to answer. I would like to see, in the very long term, a decommodification of housing in this region, which is a very complex process. But basically, what that boils down to is taking power away from landowners and giving it to rentiers through a community land trust, renters unions, rights of first refusal, things of that nature.
All right. I'm sure that is complex and highly controversial. Anything that's a big change would be complex and highly controversial. How about in your life? In 5 years, where do you want to be working, or what do you want to be doing? Where do you want to be living? You could have if you had your choice of anything, money, and there were no obstacles to you to have the kind of life you want in 5 years. Where would you like to be? What would you like to be doing?
Well, currently I'm a student. I'd like to graduate eventually. I think I'd like to do something that is personally meaningful to myself and beneficial to other people. So probably like public service, something like that.
Where would you like to live?
I think California is really cool. If for some reason I have to leave California, I think either the Netherlands would be a very cool place to live, or Japan.
Okay. And would you like to rent, or would you like to own a home in 5 years if you had your choice?
That is a difficult question.
You better say rent, because you were just talking all about those high ideals.
I don't really see homeownership in my future.
No, but it's your choice. All obstacles removed. What would you like if you had your choice? You could wave a wand.
Man, I don't really know, to be honest, because that's so far away.
Well, why wouldn't you want to own a home instead of rent in 5 years?
I like the freedom to be able to move around if I could.
Good.
And for many, homeownership is more of a burden than something that frees you to do that kind of thing.
That's right, Kyle. It's a ball and chain. Great. All right. Anything else before we move the focus to the rest of the agenda?
No, unless you have any other questions for me.
No, but thank you very much. Hang in there, stay in contact with us. I like getting your Facebook messages. I like the fact that you want to see change in planning, development, sustainability, development. All those kinds of things are apropos for Marina. And we have some people here like Grace Silva Centella, who's been the chair of the Planning Commission back in her day. and now she's using that for a lot of her involvement in the city, coming from a place of the Planning Commission. She knows what's going on, and Brian McCarthy, as we mentioned, is currently on the Planning Commission. And we hope that you will be when you're ready as well, Kyle. Okay, so tonight's agenda, we're going to talk about Black Lives Matter related issues, which include the Martin Luther King Art brief update. We'll take a little bit of a dive into the police department policy manual, talk about use of force, what the restrictions and allowances are there. And then we'll look at a spreadsheet that talks about 8 Can't Wait and our policy manual and SB 230, which is a state law mandating changes in police department manuals as it regards use of force. And then at about 7 o'clock, that's the plan anyway, we'll talk about fireworks. But last week we talked about people's opinions about how they were affected by fireworks and what they wanted done as far as banning them or not banning them. And this week we want to go a little bit more specific into next steps, how we can get ready for New Year's Eve, which will be our next mini test. And our big next test will be July 4th, 2021. But January, New Year's Eve, I think is going to be a real good test. Anyway, we'll talk about that. And then after that, we'll talk about some fairly significant changes in the COVID shelter-in-place rules that came down today to Monterey County and 30 other of the 58 counties in the state of California. And then we'll end up talking about how do we make changes where we want them to be, such as with systemic racism that may be in our city or our streets or our downtown appearance, which Grace has spoken about many times at City Council, firework management. And, how do we, what kind of changes do you want improved in the city within the context of what's already going on and what's realistic for the city to add on to our plate? Because when we talk about Martin Luther King art, or we talk about going after systemic racism or focusing on the police department manual, those are all projects that take the city staff sideways from what they're already doing. So we just can't keep coming up with new ideas that are good ones without realizing the impact they have on the good ideas we're already trying to implement based on previous public, kind of like you put something on the to-do list and something might have to fall off the other end. You just can't keep adding to it as if there's not already a lineup of things that we're working on. So that'll end our discussion tonight. So brief update on the Martin Luther King art. The decision has been made not to go with the original artist, Barrington McLean, who lives in Santa Cruz, who produced the Martin Luther King Jr. bust 20 years ago, because he does live in Santa Cruz, and there was a concern about hauling the bust back and forth. Unnecessary transportation is a chance for it to get damaged. I think there's probably more to it, like maybe the artist was difficult to get a hold of. Maybe there was a good local artist, and I think it didn't need to be repaired. It just needed to be kind of buffed and polished. So I don't know who the new local artist is, but we did get an unsolicited invitation from the original artist that gave it the patina, which is a sort of a skin coat. And that's the coat that gets damaged the most by weather and time. So I'm hoping that at least we're going with the original patina professional, so we have some continuity to appreciate those that were involved long ago. But I really don't know the name of the local artist who's doing it. Brian McCarthy asked if there's local action that has to take place, or is it automatic, given that we have a moratorium on evictions extended to September. And we'll get to that, Brian, but I can answer it now. The city council will have to memorialize that extension. So we'll have it like on a consent agenda or something like that. It's not a difficult thing to do. Once the county does it, we just kind of memorialize it at our local level, because the county doesn't dictate to the city except on surrounding county properties, unincorporated. But we'll get more to that. If you want to remind me, we'll say it again, because when we do get to it, we'll have other people on likely by that time. So the MLK art, so steps are being taken to get it ready for display. There's a granite panel, one of the 4 granite panels, that has to be replaced with a new panel because that panel is broken. And those 4 panels have famous quotes from the I Have a Dream speech and other speeches that Martin Luther King Jr. made. So that's moving along as far as getting the art ready for display. And I think what's not moving along very quickly is unmothballing the Recreation and Cultural Services Commission so they can start a public process deciding where that art is going to go and how it's going to go in, as far as is it going to be supported by benches or lighting or pathways or landscaping and that sort of thing. So not much to report on the Martin Luther King Jr. art, and I'm starting to fear that if we don't do a better job of bulldogging it, it might slide further and further down the list of projects that are on the radar. So let's keep an eye on that and continue to think about it and ask about it, because I think sometimes you have to bulldog things to make sure they stay on track. Okay, so now I wanted to take a little bit of a look. This is our third time looking at a part of our police manual, police department manual. And so I'm going to try to share my screen so we can all take a look at it. And a particular part that I want to look at is that part that talks about the use of force. It's about 1,000-page manual, I think. And starting on page 54 is policy section 300. And that is the start of the use of force. So there's page 53, chapter 3, general operations. Policy 300, use of force. This has been a big part of 8 Can't Wait and Black Lives Matter. So purpose and scope provides guidelines on the reasonable use of force. And there's no way to specify the exact amount or type of force for any given situation, but every member of this police department is expected to use these guidelines to make decisions in a professional and an impartial, reasonable manner. So deadly force, use of force that creates a substantial risk of causing death or serious bodily injury, but it's not limited to a discharge of a firearm. Force itself is the application of tactics, chemicals, weapons to another person. It's not the use of force when a person allows him or herself to be searched, escorted, handcuffed, or restrained. So I guess it's when you're dealing with resistance that you're dealing with force. The duty to intercede, I'm going to jump through this a little quickly. So policy 300.2.1 is important because it's one of the 8 Can't Wait policies, one of the 8 policies that Black Lives Matters sometimes uses as suggestions they have. And one of those is a duty to intervene or intercede. And our police chief has told us, well, we've already got that one covered because it's already in our policy manual. And I think she's referring to this. Here it is. Any officer present observing another officer using force that's clearly beyond that which is objectively reasonable shall, not should, shall intercede to prevent the use of unreasonable force. If an officer observes another employee use force that exceeds the degree of force permitted by law, should, not shall, but should promptly report these observations to a supervisor. So if I'm a member of the public and I'm trying to protect people more from unnecessary harm, I would look at some of these shoulds and I would ask, why would an officer not have to report promptly the excessive use of force if I were to observe another officer doing that? But those are the kinds of details that we're going to need to be intelligent about the current policy in order to recommend changes in policy. And we'll talk a little bit later about changes coming down the pipe due to SB 230, a state law that requires many changes in the realm of use of force to every city's police department's policies. So while they're already changing some of these things, then that's our opportunity to say, okay, how deep do we want to go with the change? Do we want to change them minimally, or do we want to do something more than minimal in each different case? Like in this case, section 300.2.1, there's something in SB 230 about interceding. So we need to keep an eye on that because that might be something we might want to change if there's ways to improve it to better protect the public without reducing the effectiveness of the officers and their own safety. talks about factors that are needed to be used to determine whether or not to use force. And one of those is if the officer perceives how the officer perceives the conduct of the individual being confronted. And you can tell that that's probably very biased, because if I'm an 80-year-old little man, or I'm a 18-year-old large man, that might make a difference. And the perception of the officer can probably change based on the subject's, demographics and age and size and all that. Other officer subject factors: age, strength, skill of the officer versus the subjects, drugs and alcohol, the mental capacity of the subject, the public, whether there's weapons nearby, that's D. The degree to which the subject's already been effectively restrained and his or her ability to resist despite being restrained. The availability of other options. Seriousness, G, seriousness of the suspected offense or reason. So if it's a murder or it's falling asleep in your car, there might be different levels of force that are expected based on the circumstances, such as that. The experience of the officer, what kind of training that officer has, the potential for injury to everybody involved, including bystanders, the officers themselves, and the suspects, the risk of escape, and other exigent circumstances. The risk of escape, to me, number J, is very interesting, because if I'm escaping from a shoplifting versus I'm escaping from armed robbery, I think we need to have some public discussion about when does risk of escape matter more in some situations, because we've seen a lot of people across the country who are running away that are either hurt or killed, and their crimes sometimes are very small ones, or they're suspected crimes. So I think part of the discussion is, what's our policy, or what should it be to let people go rather than use force on them to keep them? And we'll get into that, because that'll come up again later on under a different section. And I think that looking at it from the perspective of an officer, these paragraphs are really coming at it from what would it be like if we were police officers. It's recognized that officers are expected to make split-second decisions, and that the amount an officer's time is available to evaluate and respond to changing circumstances may impact her or his decision. While various degrees of force exist, each officer is expected to use only that degree of force reasonable under the circumstances to accomplish the law enforcement purpose in accordance with this policy. And that, I think, relates to the risk of escape and the seriousness of the crime. And so I think that the law enforcement purpose might be to detain someone who's a shoplifter or walking drunk in public, but that can go south quickly, as we've seen around the country. And so are those walking drunk in publics or shoplifting, are they worth having a very dramatic, injurious situation coming out of them so that they're escalated from where they started? Or does de-escalation require a little bit more leniency, and maybe we don't detain that walking drunk or that shoplifter if that shoplifter or drunk person happens to escape, and our policy says that we don't want to escalate those situations. But that, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that that's something that's up for discussion because of what has caused Black Lives Matter, which is a lot of low risk situations, low crime situations going south and turning into highly injurious, serious interactions between law enforcement and suspects. Non-deadly force applications. Any application that is not reasonably anticipated to cause basically death or serious injury. So there's deadly force applications by officers, and there's non-deadly force. Each officer is provided with equipment, training, and skills to control suspects. And I think this is very interesting, the last sentence. Non-deadly force applications may include, but are not limited to, leg restraints, control devices, and taser. So, I think of taser as pretty harmful, but that's a non-deadly force application, because for most people, it's not likely to result in serious injury or death. but it kind of gives us the reality of what the policy says, that tasers are non-deadly force, but none of us would ever want to be tased. I'm sure of that. We have some more use of force, talking about using only that force that is reasonably necessary. Again, from the officer's perspective, given that no policy can realistically predict every possible situation, officers are entrusted to use well-reasoned discretion in determining the appropriate use of force. And there again, I think that some policy clarification would help if our policy was to go more lenient on low-level crimes. Then the well-reasoned discretion might be, this is one of those crimes where that person was asleep on a park bench. He got scared when I approached. Maybe he had some marijuana or some other drug on his body, and he ran because he didn't want to be caught. My well-reasoned discretion might be not to give chase, or not to use force if it's needed to catch him. But right now, I think that an officer might encounter a low risk subject or person and decide that it's reasonable within her discretion or his discretion to apply force to catch and retain that person. And maybe that's okay, but maybe it's not okay. I just think it's probably worth at this time with Black Lives Matter some public discussion about that. Okay, we can go down to talking about pain compliance, and officers utilizing pain compliance should consider the degree to which the technique may be controlled given the level of resistance. So I guess that means, can you increase or decrease the pain if the subject is resisting or not resisting? Whether the person is able to comply with the orders of an officer. I guess you apply more pain if the person can't comply. Or maybe you don't apply pain if the person is mentally disabled and doesn't understand your directions. I don't think you would continue to apply force, but I'm not really clear on that. But we all probably need to get clear on that. Whether the person has been given sufficient opportunity to comply. And that has to do with de-escalation techniques, which we might have time to get into, or we might not have time to get into. Final word on that pain compliance technique application is that any pain compliance technique shall be discontinued once the officer determines that compliance has been achieved. In the George Floyd case, during that 8.5 minutes, I think most people would say that compliance had been achieved, but the technique applied that was causing him pain was not discontinued and caused his death, even after he was pretty submissive under those 3 officers who were on him. Okay, we get to something that's very controversial. It's one of the 8 can't wait. In fact, it's number 1 in the 8 can't wait, and it's no chokeholds. A carotid control hold is similar to a chokehold. Some people think it's the same as a chokehold, although police officers distinguish between chokeholds and carotid control holds. On June 5th, the governor of California said that he would be directing that chokeholds no longer be included in the training of California police officers. The next day, our city's police chief reported she had changed our policy so that no carotid control holds would any longer be allowed in non-deadly circumstances. You could still, she said, use a pencil and poke someone's eye, or you could kick them in the groin, or you could choke them any way you wanted to if it was a deadly application of force. But in non-deadly force situations, no longer in the City of Marina are these control holds allowed. However, if you go on the city's website, like I did the last few weeks, including tonight, there's a lot in there about these carotid control holds. And so we need to ask the question, why does the public still see a lot of information about how to use carotid control holds if they're not any longer allowed? So we need to just be aware of that. But it's possible that officially the policy has changed, but the policy manual has not been changed. So there's a lot there about carotid holds that I'd like to skip for tonight, because there's a potential that those are no longer in the official manual. And now we get to this next section about how to use force to make an arrest. Any peace officer may use reasonable force to make an arrest, prevent escape, which I think is a big one, or to overcome resistance. So if I'm a 16-year-old and I have a backpack with a couple of joints in it, and a police officer attempts to detain me and I run away, and if there's been a nearby crime, a burglary or something, you know, what kind of techniques can the officers use to prevent escapes? And when should they be able to prevent escapes? And when should they be directed to let the escape happen to avoid it turning into something that's unnecessarily serious for that situation? There was something in here about an officer not ever needing to retreat, but that's not the place here. But it does talk about retreat, where retreat does not mean tactical repositioning or other de-escalation techniques. So if an officer repositions herself or himself, even if they're moving backwards, that's not retreat. And de-escalating their use of techniques is not retreating. So I think retreating might be disengaging with the subject and letting the subject have the space to do what the subject was doing or wanted to do. There is somewhere in here, and I think I may have missed it, that says that an officer is never required to retreat. And that, once we find where that is, I think that's another point that we could look at, because if an officer is never required to retreat, that's maybe why we run into some situations where the public might wish that the officer had let the subject go and retreated. I know during these Black Lives Matter protests, the officers appear to be retreating all the time, but maybe they're just repositioning their vehicles to give the protesters space, and they're practicing de-escalation techniques. To the layperson, it looks like they're retreating when the protesters come up to them and the officers get in their car and they drive away, rather than confronting or stopping the protesters. So I don't understand what retreat means, as it distinguishes itself from repositioning or de-escalation, but I need to learn that. There's factors here to use the reasonableness of force, and I won't go through all of these because of the time of tonight. I think we've taken a good enough peek into the use of force. And so what I want to do is just go as a goodbye step to their policy. I just want to go to the table of contents so you can kind of get an idea of what we looked at and what we didn't. Sorry for this. So it's a 734-page document that includes all of the city's police policies. And on the right-hand side is the page number. On the left-hand side is the section number. Sorry about this. It's just not that easy to move around because it's a big document and it moves quick. We've gone over some of these code of ethics in previous town halls. So here's the table of contents. And it starts to get mostly serious when you get to chapter 3, which is what we were looking at. We were looking at use of force. We didn't get to shooting policy. We didn't get to vehicle pursuits, which is another 8 can't wait demand, that there's no shooting involved at moving vehicles. We didn't get to domestic violence, and we know that that's a big issue in the public, because domestic violence and other situations that probably could use social workers when they only get enforcement professionals, sometimes those domestic violence situations get worse than they need to be. Let's see what else is in that section of 300s. Hate crimes, handcuffing policies. Anyway, so that section is a pretty important one, and it's a pretty long one. So that's just a little look into how the police manual is organized. And I think that the 8 can't wait policies, most of them are going to be found in this chapter 3, which is really about how police officers engage with potential suspects or potential crimes. Okay, so before I go into SB 230 and how it might affect all of this, I wanted to open it up to questions, comments, so we can have a discussion with all of you. And Carissa, why don't you lead off since you have your hand up? So go ahead, everybody. If you raise your Zoom hand, or if you don't know how to do that, just wiggle your hand. Carissa, I think you're,
okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I've unmuted. Okay, so, all right. So I appreciate you going through the policy and spending so much time thinking and studying about this and trying to understand along with all of us, like where we need to change. But I think that what the Black Lives Matter movement is asking for is a lot broader change than just looking at the policy that's already in place, because we know that's not serving our communities well enough. So I think that we're looking at like a whole restructuring of the system, and so I think our focus maybe needs to shift more to the Cahoots program that we were talking about. And I know that Adam was already on board with that and has been trying to work on it. So I think we need to find out what he's doing and who he's collaborating with and how we can help move that forward. And because a lot of these issues really just require mental health professionals, like the thing that happened in March.
Carissa, let me interrupt you just for a moment. To the extent that you're correct, and I think you are, all of those Cahoots and other kinds of changes are going to result in policy changes in this manual. How they respond to domestic violence, which is right now in the manual, and how they respond.
Sure.
You know, it would be different if we were going to go to the Oregon model of what we refer to as Cahoots. But I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I agree with you 100%. But I think in the end, everything that you want is going to have to be spelled out very specifically in this manual because it's
That's
so
true.
legal.
I understand. I totally understand. The tricky part about the policy, though, is that the company that writes it, Lexipol, they're a bunch of lawyers whose job is to protect the police, and protect their jobs. So is that helping our community?
It is if it's a public process. So if we start with the Lexipol recommendations and we understand what the policy says and what they're telling us needs to change, and it doesn't get us to the Cahoots, then we're ready with language from Cahoots that we tell City Council to put into the policy in addition to the consultant's recommendation so that the policy change goes deeper than the consultant initially recommends.
I totally respect what you're saying. I just want to make sure that we're keeping our focus broad and not just on the 8 can't wait, because as the police chief said, that we're already pretty much following those things. So if we focus too closely on that, we might lose the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right now, those 8 can't wait policies that refer to policy changes required by SB 230, they're going to change, but they're going to probably change to the minimum if it's just Lexipol, if it's without the public. So like that it says should and shall, we need to look at that. And then when it gets to what happens if they violate a shall, if they violate a should, if the policy is not changed in the disciplinarian realm, then we're not probably going to be satisfied. We want to know how accountable are they to be following these policies. And I don't see anything so far in the policies that make me understand what happens if they're violated. So I assume in most cases it's an internal investigation. And I think that's part of the Black Lives Matter demand, is that there be more public transparency to the reporting of use of force and the reporting of citizen complaints, et cetera, et cetera. So just making the policy changes so that everyone can say 8 can't wait is being implemented, it doesn't go far enough, because 8 can't wait doesn't go very deep into the weeds that I've seen. And I think that we're going to want to get into the weeds before we're going to know that we're actually implementing the spirit of Black Lives Matter and the spirit of 8 can't wait.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, I'm not trying to blame you for not understanding it. I've been learning about this, like, very quickly in the last few weeks, and I sent you something about 8 can't wait like 3 weeks ago, and then I learned that's way not enough, and so I kind of derailed you. And anyways, I take ownership of that. Can I ask one question though?
You have all the time you want.
So did you hear about what happened in Monterey? I believe it was over the weekend. There was a young gentleman who said he was suicidal. He had a BB gun. No. Okay, so he was saying he was suicidal, and he had what looked like a pistol, and from the outside it looked like a real gun, but it ended up being a BB gun. From what I read, so Monterey police showed up, and they, oh shoot, I might have to have somebody else explain what happened, because I don't know the exact order of events, but eventually what ended up happening was he was shot with a non-lethal weapon himself. He was shot, and another officer tried to shoot him with a real gun, but missed, and then they took him into custody. And this young guy was saying he was suicidal. He did say he was going to shoot, but it was just a BB gun that he was holding. So it's one of those situations where it's like this guy is suffering from mental illness and he's suicidal, and then what ends up happening at the end of the day is he's in jail and now has a criminal record. And how is that helping him? So
Or society.
Yeah. So it's just something to think about, and just another one of the issues where it's like, how could the police have responded differently? How could a mental health expert responded to it more effectively?
And what does the police policy manual dictate that might have relevance on that situation? That's a really tough one, but I think it does get back in every case to the manual, because that's the starting point, is what that manual allows officers or prohibits the officers from doing. Anything more, Carissa?
Oh, I have a lot more to say, but not right now.
Okay, well, jump in when you want. We'll go to Nathaniel and then Danielle.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
So I'm gonna actually bring in my job in this, because that it will actually start talking about some things. I actually had a victim of sex trafficking who lives here in Marina. I'm a human trafficking, mostly labor trafficking specialist for the county, but because of my colleague has some personal issues, I'm taking on domestic and sex trafficking right now as well. And this woman who's staying in a hotel here in Marina is a prostitute. Of course, I can't give you that too much information on it, but long story short, she was afraid to call Marina local law enforcement because she's afraid of the police. You know, as a guy who, it's pretty much as an intake, all I do is take the information of these victims, and I pass the information on to a counselor, to a legal associate that we have, and we give them shelter. Sometimes we pay for their hotels, things like that. But if we can't use our local law enforcement because our victims are afraid to be thrown into a jail, because they are victims of something, regardless what it is, if it's domestic violence to sex trafficking to being an undocumented immigrant, we have problems. And I was listening. First, I want to say AB 230. We're going to talk about that later, but it's perfect. But you know, something interesting about AB 230 and AB 392, we're not really applying them into our local law. I'm talking local right now, Marina law enforcement agencies. And listening to just a little bit that Bruce was talking about, I'm sadly been busy all day. I didn't get to really go through Marina's policy and procedures, but just a little bit that he told us, it sounds like they were mostly trying to save their butts and not really implementing AB 230 guidelines at all. Shall and should, we should question that, because those are wordings that you can play with to protect you. Also, pain should not.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Go ahead.
You can have the floor
do.
back. The AB 230 is not yet infused into our policy. So what we have right now is our current old policy, and AB 230 requires what we saw tonight to be changed. hasn't yet been, but go ahead.
Okay. And for the folks that haven't looked at AB 230, just a quick, small snippets of it. Existing law requires each law enforcement agency to annually furnish specified information to the Department of Justice regarding the use of force by a peace officer. Each year, a police department summary should be given out to the public, but that's not until January 2021, where it should be taking effect. But I mean, we can have it earlier than that. It's just that's the deadline for when all agencies in California need to apply this. We need to start establishing 8 can't wait is beautiful in a way, but we need to go beyond 8 can't wait. It's bigger than 8 can't wait. We should not be using non-lethal weapons. Should not be killing people. If they're less than lethal, then they should not. You've seen George Floyd. You've seen what happened with him. That was a just to get the wording right, that was technically a carotid control hold that officer put George Floyd in. That is legal in Marina. To currently is legal and from what the policy and procedures that we just looked at.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? If you can see my screen, what we're told is that the chokeholds of any kind are now prohibited for non-lethal force as of June 6th. The policy doesn't look like it, and I'm hoping there's just a lag in updating the policy. Go ahead, Nathaniel.
No, I mean, yeah, you're right, but that's the problem, though. Our policies need to reflect what our state government is bringing up. That's all I want to say right now is that we need to change. We're fighting the Black Lives Matter movement, and all of us are fighting for federal change. But let's look at our local law enforcement agency right now, and let's see what we can do at home, because we have a lot of people of color that need change right now here at our home. We can't talk about Seaside, Salinas right now. It's all about Marina and what we can do in the city. I live here right now. I'm going to have kids one day to hear. Christina Medina has young, brown, little, beautiful girls that I'm sure she wants to make sure when they're older, they're not discriminated against. And I'm sure the rest of you can feel the same way. So that's what we're fighting today. We're not fighting for Salinas. We're not fighting for Seaside. We'll do that on Saturday and Sundays and every other day. Today, let's talk about what we can do for Marina.
Right on, Nate. Thank you very much. And thank you for letting me interrupt you now and then. I hope it doesn't bother you too much. Okay, let's go to Danielle.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, good evening.
Hi. I had one question and then one comment. So my question was, Bruce, would you mind speaking to what is the City Council's involvement in the manual revisions? Do you vote on those revisions? Do you have authority in those revisions, or are you more of a recommendation board?
The police chief would say that we have the say-so as a city council what goes into that policy manual. But tradition and practice has been that the city council defers 100% to the police. We don't get into the details. We don't know what they say. This is my first time the last few weeks looking into our police manual. They've never come before me, and I've been on city council basically since the year 2000, with a few years, 2004 to 2008, where I wasn't. But anyway, there's been many policy changes since then brought down by Lexapol on a yearly basis. And we on city council don't want to see them in the past. We have not wanted to see them. We have not thought about them. We've surely never deliberated about them, and never has it been a public process to do so. So this is unprecedented opportunity where we have to have major changes with AB 230. At the same time, that passed last year in 2019. At the same time, we have Black Lives Matter. So it's a perfect storm for us breaking tradition and having the public and the city council involved for the first time in what you've just spoken about.
Great, thank you. And then my comment, I typed it out just because I knew I wasn't going to be very eloquent trying to speak off the cuff, but I guess I just wanted to say that, you know.
Danielle, sorry to interrupt
yes.
you. There's a problem with the audio. It sounds like there's something going on with your audio. We can hear you, but it's distracting. Now we can't hear you at all. Sounds like you're cussing at me.
Oh, is this any better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. So the other item, I just wrote out some notes, and I just wanted to mention, you know, if you look at the training that law enforcement officers have to go through, they have to fit a million things in a very tiny time frame in their training. And I feel bad for how diverse their job needs to be in everything that they are asked to be expert on. So I want to kind of mention that empathy and that concern for how much is on the plate of law enforcement officers. I'm a clinical psychologist that required 4 years of undergraduate training plus 6 years of graduate level training specifically in how to treat and care for people living with severe mental illness. And even at my level of training, it would be incredibly difficult to do the crisis intervention needed in a quote unquote suicide by cop situation, like what Carissa just mentioned. And so I think the example of this recent incident that Carissa brought up shows that it is unfair to law enforcement officers to ask them to take on so many different high stakes, important roles, especially when there are other people in our community who have intense amounts of training related to mental health and crisis intervention that could be a supportive role in that context. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that up, that, you know, if we could take one intense thing off of the plates of a law enforcement officer and give it to somebody else whose entire training has been focused on how to interact with and de-escalate crisis situations, I think everyone wins, including law enforcement officers who might feel like, oh my gosh, thank you for taking that role away from me because it's so intense and so challenging. I would love the help of someone who's licensed and trained to do this work. So,
well, in a simple
for a law enforcement officer, but I would imagine that there might be some relief in having that assistance.
And I think that when Carissa talks about the Oregon's program and that what we see happening in Denver, it really boils down to money to pay for expertise to either assist or replace the presence of an officer on calls they get or the 911 dispatch gets that do not require enforcement. And we've heard a lot about volunteer experts who are trained as you are, Danielle, and they take like 24,000 calls since they started in the COOTS program, and they've only had to call an officer on something like 300 of them or 200 of them or 600 of them. Your point is well taken, and my only response is that it's just a matter of money. And probably for $200,000 or less per year, the city could have all of its necessary assistance replacement. So it doesn't even have to come out of the police department budget. It could just be something that's augmented funding in a new direction. So we're sitting on at least $3 million that we haven't used for the last 10 years. And we're expecting to get more money as time goes on. So it's going to get easier, not harder, for us to be able to afford what you're talking about. We can already afford it. Now that's assuming that the COVID doesn't take us for a much deeper dive than any of us have thought about, because we're expecting a pretty deep financial hit. And still, we're going to end up with $8 million in the bank as of June 30th, 1st, or June 30th, 2021. That's not counting $2 million coming in November with a statewide ballot initiative that's likely to pass. That would up the $8 million to $10 million. So I'm just saying that we could afford it if it's important for enough for us to spend it. And it probably wouldn't require it wouldn't require inability to do something else that's really important to us, although there's always a list of things longer than the money we have to spend. But if this is an important matter, moderate to high importance value, we have the money to afford it, but we don't have the roadmap in our experience. We have to look elsewhere outside of the city and probably outside the county to know how to implement that kind of a program. Okay, we're going to go to Kathy next. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you. One of the other things too, because having a long career in nursing for a long career, I don't want to admit how long, but I'm also very practical, and so I have hired for inpatient units, evening shifts, night shifts. I've been in home health and private duty nursing, where you have, shifts, in the evening, or private duty 24-hour care, and then also in psych hospitals, et cetera. And I will tell you that it's really difficult to staff, evening and night shifts. And so just as a practical thing, when you look at, yes, we have to have the money, but are we going to be able to staff social workers and psychiatric nurses or whatever, to be on call throughout the night, where a lot of these really, really dire situations happen? And so just, not to say that it can't happen, but you have to have somebody on call if you're not doing the full-time stuff. And a lot of people that I know that are in social work and psychiatric services, we don't usually have the night shifts staffed. I mean, except in inpatient units. So that would be a very, very hard thing to recruit, especially from a more limited area like we have. So again, I always have this practical kind of look at things that we know we need, but how do you actually, staff those positions?
And Kathy, that's a good point. And that's the number one response that our chief of police gave us. She said, this is all well and good, but most of our calls that are mental abuse, or I'm sorry, mental situation, or substance abuse or homeless issues, they come in the early hours of the night or the morning, and there's nobody in the social service realm available. And what I've heard as a response to that is that you get other cities in the county, along with Marina, to chip in monies so that there's a regional availability for when those calls come in. So it's not just Marina working on its own, because that would be very difficult 24/7 to have somebody paid to be on call. Maybe on call is a lot less than actually being on a shift, because maybe sometimes on call you don't get call, you still get like $10 an hour or something for being on call, but it's not the same as working. But anyway, that there are ways around it to get 24/7 social workers to come to these incidents. And I think that we only need to look at Oregon and Denver, because nothing that we're thinking or talking about tonight everything we're talking about has been successfully implemented elsewhere. We just need to find out, how did they do it and how much did it cost, and was it regional? And probably it's regional and not city by city, working independently of one another.
Yes, and certainly the availability of those kinds of trained professionals in a much larger city like Denver. That's, I think, again, it's a different challenge than even here if we even collate, all of the cities and stuff. So just something to think about, because the reality always, tends to interfere with our best intentions.
Good points. Thank you. Okay, let's go to Christina and then Nathaniel.
Hello. There we go. Hi. Brought up the point I was going to make about a regional approach. They do that with fire departments and in other ways. But what about nonprofits? I don't know if you went down this path yet. We have many nonprofits that do provide like Interim and other organizations that do provide mental health services in crisis and various levels. So maybe that might also be something down the road. And then later on, from the point of view of, if something like this does get established, there may very well be grant money for this, in the sense that if you make a hire, like a police hire, that you have that special training, or, what is the lady that was speaking, Danielle, she has so many years behind her, but maybe there is some special training that can get us part way there with the help of federal grants or anything like that. Anyways, so I was just thinking I had a couple steps, but I definitely think we should maybe pursue the nonprofit angle, because there's organizations that do this locally.
Yeah. As we look to not recreate the wheel around the nation, nonprofits have played large roles in getting us to where we want to be ourselves. So that's definitely a high likely option that we involve nonprofits in. That doesn't mean that they do it for free if they're a nonprofit, but to be sustainable and be available 24/7, it's not going to be on a volunteer basis. And so sustainability of such a program using nonprofits or other for-profits is going to require new money. But I think you're right. Nonprofits should be considered strongly because that's what's been helpful in other places around the nation. Specifically trained police to better handle these situations may or may not, I think it may take us away from where Black Lives Matter and all of our discussion is taking us, is to get the gun off of the body of the person that's responding. And so getting a specially trained police officer is better than having a less trained police officer. But I think most people in the Black Lives Movement would say that a specifically trained police officer would not be as good as a social worker who's got the more in-depth training. But maybe that specifically trained police officer is an interim step before we get to the nirvana of having fully staffed non-enforcement social worker staff helping us. All right, Nathaniel, go ahead.
All right. As one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement here in Monterey County, who started the first march in Monterey County, threw it to Tyler Williams, and I let him use his political powers to help me out in Monterey. I will say that it's all about taking the guns off the streets when it comes to law enforcement and regular citizens. And I want to touch base on what Kathy and Christina had already spoke about in regards to nonprofits. And someone mentioned earlier how law enforcement officers are so overworked, and they are. I was a corrections officer for over 3.5 years, and just seeing all the trauma, the mental health issues that the inmates had, and I had no skills for that. I was literally in undergrad school at 19 years old studying criminal justice and Spanish. I had no real training on how to deal with people like that, and we had no one in our jail and prison systems that actually handled that. We had to call people from outside of our prison system to handle those situations. And I would say the same thing for when I was learning from my law enforcement mentors on the streets. It's the same thing. And I would say that we have, like Christina already mentioned, nonprofits do play a vital role. We have YWC of Monterey County, where we handle domestic violence issues. Instead of putting them in jails, we put them in shelters. We put them in hotels. We give them counseling. We want to use our money. But we literally have to use our money. That's what we're getting funded. I don't want to put our money out there because I haven't talked to my CEO about that yet. But let's just say we're in the millions. We're pretty well funded, and we need the people. You send them our way, we're going to be able to help law enforcement out drastically. We have Doherty's Place where they handle domestic violence. They handle sex trafficking, things like that. We have county social workers already that are staffed 24/7 to handle calls. We have all these things, and we need to make sure that our law enforcement agencies have these numbers, have these organizations. And I'm speaking specifically in Marina. If they have someone that needs to get away from their abuser, they need to be able to know the YWC of Monterey County number. So they call me or one of my colleagues, and we can put them in a hotel. We can give them a new place to live. We can pay their rent for however long until they get on their feet. These are the things that we do have right now. And we need to start talking about those things and implementing them into our future policy here in Marina. That's all I have to say for right now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nick. Okay, to wrap this up, anybody want the final word?
Yeah, right here.
Go ahead. Hi, Chris.
I'm Christopher Ian Gonzalez-Wilmot. It's a pleasure to meet you all. So far, I just wanted to from the last meeting. She was looking over the, and by the way, I'm on the bus right now, so I'm sorry about the lagginess. But just to let you know, in Marina, we don't really have that kind of problem where it comes down to the brutality thing, if that's even on the subject right now. But if you personally ask me, the police officers out here are basically like the kind of Navy SEALs, They're, how you say, really good, but if they go soldier mode, you don't want to be in their way, basically. And all I know is they're really good at what they do, especially Officer Nolan, he's retired, and especially Miss Chief Tina. She's the nicest lady out there I've ever known. And sorry if I'm yelling, it's because it's loud where I'm at. But all far I know is we do have some issues, but not all of them. Most of the issues that I have to say are basically coming from like outer ways, but not quite in ways. But I don't have my slides right here, so I can't really tell you. But the one thing is we're good at where we're at. So yes. But if there has to be changes, change it.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, I think that in some ways we're very lucky. We're in a position where we don't have a lot of shots being fired by officers. We don't have a lot of people being injured or detained that we know of, wrongfully so. And it's a great time to be, we're lucky to be able to be proactive. So I think we're talking a lot about proactivity and also a little bit about taking a little bit of a leadership role in showing what we can do as a city that's not under the gun, sorry for that expression, to make changes now because we're in such a horrible situation right now. We're not. So it's a great time to be able to make changes when you're not have to doing it in haste or you're not required to. It's more out of choice, except that SB 230 is going to require changes within the next year. And we should, I think, be involved in making sure those changes are as good as we want them to be. Okay, so we're going to switch topics, and I appreciate everyone who's contributed to the Black Lives Matter related city policies on the police manual topics. We're going to switch to fireworks, and we've talked about a lot of opinions of banning fireworks or not banning fireworks in Marina. We've talked a lot about how the illegal fireworks are really the problem, but still some people think that if you ban the legals, it makes it less likely people use illegals. That's an opinion that we need to find out based on research if it's correct or not, because everyone's opinion really needs to be backed up with cited studies. So that is still to come. But tonight I wanted to get everybody's thoughts who want to express them on what do we do to get ready for New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2020, is going to be our next explosive night with everything that's illegal, because there are no legal, safe, and sane fireworks on that day. And there really aren't any safe and sane fireworks anyway used on that day. It's really just illegal fireworks on that day. So we know that like last July, January 1st, this coming January 1st, or New Year's Eve, is going to be a loud one, probably louder than last year, which was pretty loud. And so I think it's the city's opportunity to look ahead and come October, make some decisions about how we're going to work New Year's Eve. Are we going to use drones? Are we going to increase staff? Are we going to do public outreach in advance to let the people know how to report location information so the police can get to the problems? Are we going to have the ability to confiscate unused illegal fireworks by enlisting the contractual services of a hazmat team or getting our own vault that we can put them in? Are we going to have metrics that we're going to shoot for, what is successful and what's not successful? Maybe our metric is that our goal is to have 10 citations so that we can get down that road of making examples of enforcement so that less people think it's worth it to use illegal fireworks. Those are just a few ideas that we could consider. But right now we're just kind of flopping in the wind because we as a city have never gone after illegals in a very concerted way, illegal fireworks. So just a brief introduction, and now I'll turn it over to all of you. What would you like us to do before January 1st when we know is going to be the next big use of illegal fireworks? And the problem is they scare pets, they scare people, they scare wildlife, and they could be harmful to people's for causing physical injuries, and they might start fires on occasion here in Marina. So I'll just open it up to what you all think. Go ahead and raise your hands in some fashion. Okay, nobody wants to talk about that, so we'll move on. No, just kidding. Okay, go ahead, Brian.
I'll take a stab, Mr. Mayor.
I muted you accidentally, Brian.
Sorry, I'll take a stab, Mr. Mayor. So I think if we are being serious about taking a look at the firework issue, I think one of the first things we can do is send a message that we are serious. I mean, if we determine that illegal fireworks are being used, and we I guess catch someone who's using those. I mean, I'd like to see the police department, I guess, use all of the tools that they have in their toolbox to enforce whatever the rules are, specifically outside of the dates of July 4th and New Year's Eve. You know, I think this year some of these fireworks started as early as May, 2 months before. And I think there was some pretty good evidence of where some of that was coming from. So I think that would send a clear message. I think that's what Seaside has done and what some other cities have done. And I think they've seen a big reduction in the use of fireworks, at least before the actual holidays. So I can't really speak to fireworks happening on the holidays. That's going to be a huge challenge, I think. But I think fireworks that go off, you know, months before the holiday is an issue as well.
Thanks, Brian. I perhaps mistakenly always thought that they would be harder to track because they're one-offs. You know, some kids light them and they run away. But I didn't ever think about getting stronger, tougher on in between holiday times. That's a great idea. I didn't think of it. Okay, Grace.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi again. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. So I think we have to do what the fire chief of McCown said. I think it was at your last town hall. I think the council needs to set aside $15,000 is what he was mentioning in order to be able to have the funds to be able to, whatever is confiscated, to be legally removed from the state of California or wherever. I think we need an ordinance that has some teeth to it and allows the fire and police to issue citations and have a dollar amount to the citation. And it sounds like what Seaside did this last 4th of July was extremely successful. So I think we should have ask that Tina and Doug meet with their fellow police chief and fire chief over in Seaside and powwow and come back to you, the city council, with a proposal, and let's be ready, because it was awful on Susan Avenue, really bad, and it continues to be. And what good does it do me to call if there's no, if they can't even take the illegal firework and dispose of it legally here in Marina? So
or possess it. They can't even possess it because they don't have anything. They can't put it anywhere.
Exactly. So I say let's do it, because it's getting pretty bad out there. Thank you.
Okay, Grace. Before you go, I understood that Seaside did more for enforcement than Marina, but that it was still a war zone.
It's what it sounds like, but they did 22 citations for illegal fireworks compared to 1 in 2017. They seized 16 illegal fireworks. This is a Coast Weekly article.
Okay, so Grace, let me interrupt you just to play devil's advocate. They did those really good things, and it was a war zone.
It was a war zone. First year that really cracked down. I think each year progresses, and as we go from 4th of July to New Year's Eve, to the next 4th of July to New Year's Eve, we're going to start getting a little bit of peace.
Right. So your point is get started doing what we can, and we'll probably have the payoff in time.
And the next town hall meeting, can we have a discussion about the muscle cars that are revving around town? And
I'm just not sure if that's a big enough issue, Grace. I think you're the only one that cares about it. No, just kidding. Yeah, that's great. Muscle cars.
Thank you.
You have to maybe remind me, send me an email or something. That'll kind of be a fun discussion. It'd be great to get people on that have muscle cars to have that perspective. Enid, you were really excited there. Did you want to respond to what Grace just said?
Well, I guess I always just look excited, but I was just thinking about how, we were just talking about police and when things are criminalized and, what that means, and just thinking about this discussion. And I want to just acknowledge it, make it really my own personal thing. I'm not as affected by the fireworks, and I acknowledge that many, many people are, and it's really upsetting, and it can cause a lot of traumatic stress and things like that. And I want to be really sensitive about that. And also, it's really hard on a lot of our pets and wildlife. But I'm just wondering, to go from no enforcement to really strict, harsh enforcement where we have, you know, young folks getting tickets they can't pay, or we have people getting in the system suddenly. You know, I think having things confiscated that you like doing is always a bummer. And, you know, maybe that's like a, you know, stopping there. I'm concerned about it being, you know, so now it's a crime that we're going to enforce heavily. It just seems like that's kind of antithetical to the conversation we just had.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to line up the first 20 suspects that were cited, you know, how old would they be? What color would their skin be? You can pretty much kind of guess what they're going to end up looking like. You know, they're going to be 18 to 35-year-old males of some sort of immigrant ancestry, right? For the most part.
I mean, Marina is a diverse city. We kind of drove around curiously checking out who was setting them off. And this is out, you know, I live out in the county, so you guys can take what I say with a grain of salt. But
CSUMB housing, right?
Yeah. But, you know, across the way from us was just, it looked like better than the fireworks we had in my hometown that were professional. I mean, it was unreal. And it was all young people, you know, setting them off. And so just the idea of them being arrested or being given tickets, you know, after them really having a reasonable expectation of that not happening, just seems a little bit out of step with what we were just talking about.
And plus they'd be broke because they just spent all their money on the fireworks.
Oh, yes. I was also thinking, like, could we just, you know, is there a way to think about all the creative energy and financial investment that went into that? And when we can have fireworks, you know, maybe we're creating a young folks driven fireworks show. You know, I don't know, but just to be more creative about it than maybe giving them tickets.
Yeah, thanks. Kyle, do you want to go out of order, or are you raising your hand?
I'm sorry, was someone else first?
Well, why don't you go ahead? We haven't seen you too much.
Very good. So noise, pollution, these are all examples of, in economics, what we call externalities, which are costs passed on to a third party for doing something. So the tools that governments have to address those problems are, you can tax something and you can subsidize a solution, or you could outright prohibit something. Now, given the spirit of this conversation around something that celebrates the freedoms of Americans, I think a more creative solution might be something along the lines of, instead of prohibiting outright, what the city can do is essentially collect donations from everybody who would want to do illegal fireworks. And then during the celebration, we find some safe location, like, for example, out on a boat in the ocean. I don't know how you would do that. I don't know the logistics of that, but have one massive show for everybody who enjoy that's far away enough from the city, because we have the luxury of living on the coast, so that noise isn't going to affect everybody, especially the pets. And you could essentially get people excited to donate this money for this massive show, instead of getting them bummed out because you have some of these folks that will be upset. You know, they're trying to take away our freedoms and control us. It's essentially working together instead of just sort of telling someone they can't do something. That's kind of my thought.
Well, we do have the Marina Airport, which would be one on the top of the list as an appropriate location. Lots of open space out there. And the City of Seaside, they spent $70,000 in 2019 for such a display. It's not easy to raise private monies in that realm. And it's not clear, if you did have a big show, that there still wouldn't be a war zone elsewhere in the city. And we still might have the same predicament of going after young people that probably can't afford the fines. But it would be a step in the right direction if we had the money. And as you say, there are ways to get it. And we could afford it, you know, but would the public want us to spend $70,000 on a big show, minus $30,000 we raised privately, so maybe $40,000? Would the public want that? So I hope that you stay tuned, because this town hall session is just kind of a primer for when the city council takes this issue up in a formal way. This is just, but then you don't have as much time to talk. So this is kind of an informal way of getting our creative juices flowing to hear some perspectives. And for me, I appreciate your perspective because I hadn't thought about that. I thought about this. I thought about city firework displays, but I didn't think about finding collaborative ways to try to avoid this pipeline to prison approach. So thank you very much, Kyle, for joining us. Okay, let's go to Christina, and then Kathy, and Danielle.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back.
Okay, there we go. Let me see. Okay. I just kind of had the conversation with my husband about it. He's a fireman, and we actually enjoyed the fireworks this year, but we knew that it was going to be, once in a lifetime around here because everybody was so cooped up and people were coming to buy fireworks. But from the perspective of a fire perspective from the city of Salinas, they've got Safe and Sane too, and that's always something they grapple with. What they've done differently has been the hotlines, the citations. They had a drone overhead, and yes, you get into that $1,000 citation that they can't pay. They've also done a ton of enforcement ahead of time, and contacting.
What kind of enforcement, Christina? What kind of enforcement?
Fire, going out and finding people, and sending letters to property owners, contacting the property owners to let them know that there's fireworks going on at your house. And the liability there from a fire perspective, if there's a fire, this is what's at risk. So if you're having, and I guess that's mostly letting them know of the liability. They've never been able to solve the problem in Salinas of the fireworks. So we just really do have to get creative and do much more enforcement ahead of time, more education ahead of time. And that Kyler, he just had that, I had that idea too. What if we had fireworks at the airport, but took it a little further and invited people to maybe bring their own and have their own little circles, because that used to happen out at Walmart, and that was kind of fun. It was the Safe and Sane, but there was kind of a controlled environment there. So this is not something you're going to solve by next 4th of July, that's for sure. We cannot ban the fireworks all out together because it's like guns. It's people who are irresponsible that are causing the trouble. And the nonprofits depend on that money to support their organizations. So even if you did ban it, you'd still have a ton of fireworks going on. So we just have to really do a better, mounting of public information, a hotline, and then have that enforcement element, whether it's really having the talks, doing some public demonstrations of what it looks like for somebody's hand to be blown off or something kind of, not that somebody's hand's going to get blown off, but, the what ifs, pictures of houses that have burned down, maybe testimonials from people's houses have burned down. I was in Seaside last year when they had that giant fireworks display, but I was positioned up on top of Seaside, and I had that display and the entire city of Seaside's display. So nothing really changed with the large fireworks, city promoted fireworks. So it's just a problem we're going to start having to grapple with and get creative.
Thank you. That's an interesting perspective. I appreciate it. Kathy, and then Danielle.
Yeah, thank you. So
did I do something wrong? I was trying to unmute Danielle and I may have muted you, Kathy. Yeah, that's what I did. I'm sorry. Okay, Kathy, go ahead.
Okay,
sorry about
so
that.
the discussion, Enid, I really appreciate what you said about trying not to criminalize this illegal fireworks because it is different than the issues that we were talking about before. There is no season or one event that violence is ever acceptable. But here we have now the fireworks issue, and it happens, once or twice a year, and usually involving young people. And, so we don't necessarily want to get hot and heavy on criminalizing something like that. But it does need to be dealt with. And I was thinking, Kyle, your examples of trying to think through a creative solution is really kind of neat because, I think when we talk about these illegal, whether we do it at the airport or whether the city does it, does that make it not illegal, just because the city does it, or is it banned for everyone? Because I could see us doing something at the airport because that's a safe place and whatnot, but I'm sure the city will look at the liabilities of that. And then if we're saying, so you can bring illegal fireworks and do it at a safe place in the airport, it's kind of a contradiction there. So we have to really think this through, and I think we have to keep our priorities of the city in terms of manpower of thinking about the solution, but also think about the balance. How serious of an issue is this for us, and how much resources are we going to dedicate this to right now? And I was thinking that, and Kyle, there may be some other things you think about too. We just keep, and we may not be able to get in there and, and have a whole full blown policy over everything, but we might think of some mini steps to make each time we have to face this a little bit less. I think I'm hoping that this 4th of July might have been a little less. In my neighborhood, I'm right by the high school, so I didn't hear a whole lot of stuff, before or after. Yes, a little bit, but not like maybe, Grace's on Susan Avenue. It sounds like it was really bad. So I was wondering, Bruce, if we can actually get something from Tina that tells us exactly where the problems were this year, because I don't have a sense of that. Some neighborhoods might have been okay, but other ones were terrible. Or was it terrible throughout the whole, the whole city? I just don't get a sense of that. So if we could have that, maybe have her give us some stats on it, because if we're going to take this, at sort of in bites about a solution, then maybe we can, from her perspective, say, is it a particular neighborhood, and is there something we can do for that? Or is there another one thing across the whole city that isn't going to take so much effort that we could see an experiment for New Year's, or whatever is the next place that we encounter this problem? So anyway, it's been a great discussion again. I'm just always amazed at the creativity of our citizenry. It's great.
Kathy, thank you, Kathy. Everything said about the airport was, I thought, meant to say, take your safe and sane, have a community party, and then let the city do the fireworks show, which makes it legal because they go through the permitting process like Seaside did last year. I don't think Kyle or anyone was suggesting that we take individual illegal fireworks and let people set them off, because that would be against the law. We could not authorize that. But it's still, everything you said is still very applicable. So thank you.
Right. Just one last thing. It's not just the noise. I mean, people want to do this. It's the social event. So, it's that pulling in of all these people. It's not just, I want to see noise and fireworks. It's really a social event. So we keep that in mind and say, how can we build that when we think about restricting other things?
Right. Thank you. We had a chat in the box from someone asking if illegal fireworks could be donated to a display, and that's a tricky area, because then you're taking illegals from people before they're able to set them off, and then you're setting them off in the show. So there's a little bit of a double standard there, and you wouldn't want to get into the case where people are buying them and then offering them up or getting caught on purpose so they could donate them to the public display, because people do find ways around those sort of loopholes. But it's a good idea to think about. And then could funding from locals pay for a display? And that's something that Kyle, I think, brought up. And yeah, that's a good thing. So the city doesn't have to pay for it all. We see how important it is to the public by asking the public for donations. And maybe it's a match. We'll match dollar for dollar, or we'll put $2 for every dollar donated. And then we see how much the public wants to see that kind of a thing. And lastly, this person said that this person wants to see fireworks organized. And otherwise, someone is saying that alternative, we're getting back into the policing thing. So we have a couple of chats about policing, but I don't want to go to those and make Danielle and Brian wait about the fireworks. So I'll go to those police-related chats after we're done with the firework issue. So go ahead, Danielle.
I just wanted to start by echoing Kathy, thanking Enid for centering the fireworks issue in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, and thinking about social issues as we're talking about city policy. That was a wonderful example of how we should do more to recenter community issues around the topics of equity, inclusion, and related thoughts. Second, I think it's important.
Can you repeat that, Danielle? I didn't understand what you were saying.
I was just, I was echoing Kathy and thanking Enid for kind of thinking about the fireworks issues from a social justice perspective.
Okay.
And I think that's a really nice example of how we need to be thinking about social justice issues with every community involved decision that we're making.
Thank you. And Kyle was all about that too. Thank you, Kyle.
And second, I just wanted to say, I think it's important to note we're not the first community to want to reduce illegal fireworks, and that there are carrots and sticks involved in promoting behavior change. Everyone here has come up with a lot of creative ideas, and I'm just wondering what research might already be out there that's been done on the utility of different carrots and sticks. I recommend we really look into the research so that whatever strategies are actually adopted have been shown to be effective in other places. We look at public health efforts that have been done to reduce illegal drug use or other illegal behaviors. The things that our gut reactions suggest should be effective aren't always effective for a variety of reasons. So I just want us to use our resources effectively to do interventions that are empirically supported so that we do this wisely. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Danielle. Okay, Brian.
Thanks, Bruce. So real quickly, Danielle talked about carrots and sticks. I'm going to talk about it in a slightly different context, but I know a couple of years ago, a city in the Central Valley was offered, I think, a $10,000 grant to put on a laser light show. And it was a coastal city like ours that is often very foggy. They were offered this grant to offer a laser light show because those kinds of shows happen to work really well in the fog. So that's kind of an idea for the future. I hope that because fireworks have not only huge noise pollution impacts, but they also have very, very serious traditional environmental pollution impacts, that we can look at non-traditional ways of offering these social events or light shows. One other example I'll give real quick is a couple years ago, I attended the Intel drone show at Travis Air Force Base on 4th of July. It was fantastic. They sent up hundreds of drones that did virtual fireworks, and there was no noise associated. And we have this great partnership with Joby Aviation, a drone company. So I hope we can look at those kind of solutions going forward and be this really cool city that has been innovative and has found some really cool ways to celebrate the 4th of July.
Brian, what do you think, that aside, on the punitive end, while we're putting on the greatest virtual show ever on Earth, what do we do about the illegal fireworks going on in the neighborhoods while that show is going on, that virtual show?
Sure. So again, I think we not only continue to get tougher on being serious about what the city means about illegal fireworks, but also kind of advertise the city-produced show in a way that hopefully shows that this new innovative way is kind of the cool way to go. And if you're not, enjoying this thing that is also a social, great, fun experience, you're kind of contributing to the problem. And I think there's kind of a little bit of advertising and that goes behind what the city wants to do, and a little bit of kind of getting everybody on board.
So peer pressure, shaming, inspiring with outreach.
All words that I think we could discuss. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't mean to say you were thinking of those. That's what I was trying to think of. All right. Would anyone like the last word on this? Okay, I wanted to back up to the police discussion because we had a couple of chats that I think are worth, and I'm sorry I didn't see them. And we'll get to one of Grace's in a minute, which has to do with the MLK Jr. artwork. But back into the police, someone wrote, I was in an abusive marriage. I was afraid to call the police and report the crimes because I didn't want my child to see the police come to our house. It would have been easier for me to leave the marriage or the house if I knew I could call a social worker instead of a police officer. Finally, I did go to a women's shelter, but it was hard to get away. And I think she means it was hard to go to the women's shelter and get away from her house, but eventually she did. And it would have been easier had she had the support and help of social workers instead of, armed officers responding to her domestic problems. I do. I think, and then Elizabeth said, thanks for walking us through the police manual document. And Elizabeth, I think we have a lot more time to spend on that than we did tonight. But I think every week I want to take a little peek into it so we can get more comfortable with it, because nobody likes wonky policy documents. So we can take a little bite at a time. And then anybody that's interested can do some more in-depth studying and thinking with me offline. And I've started to do that a little bit with Carissa and Danielle and a few others. And I think we need to do more of that and maybe pick up the pace. And I did have an idea about that. Someone today told me that they do fundraising. I forget how they did fundraising, but the point was maybe we could do some fundraising on the private side of the house. And with the money raised, let's say $3,000 to $6,000, we could hire a consultant to look at the AB 230 and look at the, let's say spend 30 or 40 hours looking at SB 230 and looking at our police manual and recommending from a Black Lives Matter perspective what city council should do, so that rather than putting the onus on us as busy people trying to find a bit of time to become the studious experts, maybe we get some help. And if there was a fundraiser out there to raise money to do that, I think we probably could get $3,000 to $10,000. And then with that money, we could get some professional full-time for at least, a few weeks or a month or two. And we'd probably be a lot further than any of us trying to, now and then find an hour or two to work on this. So I just want to throw that out there. I'll be thinking more about that in upcoming days. Okay, I wanted to go to something Grace said. It has to do, I think, with the Martin Luther King Jr. artwork, and that is, when will the Recreation and Cultural Services Commission meet? Because they are the body that City Council tasked to figure out where to put it and how to put it. So what I heard from the city manager is that he had not contacted the commissioners yet because they're very busy at City Hall. And I'm hoping that maybe the director of the Recreation and Cultural Services Department might do that if the city manager is too busy. Also, they had not yet talked to the Monterey County Health Officer, Dr. Moreno, who has to in some way be advised of what we're doing, because there is a state prohibition against commissions that are non-essential, such as the Recreation and Cultural Services Commission meeting. And I think it was an urgency step to stop them from brick and mortar meeting. I don't have any idea why they would not be able to have a Zoom meeting as a Recreation and Cultural Services Commission. But that's my thinking. I'm not the health officer for the county. So there's a couple of things that have to happen, but I'm a little disheartened, a little disappointed that as far as I know, there hasn't been as much progress made on getting that commission unmothballed, because until it starts to meet, we're not making any progress toward finding a location to put that artwork. But at least we're making progress on the artwork itself. And so I think that's a good thing. And we need to make better progress, I think, on this public venue that will decide where and how to put that artwork. So thanks. I hope you help me bulldog that, Grace. Okay, we're going to move and not spend too much time on it, because not that much time needs to be spent. But some important changes happened that affect Marina today at noon. The governor of California issued, effective immediately, restrictions that result in the closing of all bars, fitness centers, hair salons, barbershops, office space, office workers going to the office for non-essential activities, places of worship. All these places are closed again. Remember, they were closed and then they opened. Now they've been closed again in 31 counties of the 58 counties in the state, and that includes Monterey County. These 31 counties on July 7th had new restrictions because they were being monitored for not complying with the metrics of keeping the virus under control. So on July 7th, you might remember, indoor restaurants were shut down. And there were some other things that are escaping me right now. But now, a week later, other restrictions have now gone into place. So starting tomorrow, all those kinds of businesses I know card rooms was the other thing that closed a week ago, and that affected Marina because we have a card room, and that card room brings in about $200,000 a year to the city's budget. So we lose that money if the card room's not operating. But anyway, not to say that we want the card room to open under dangerous circumstances, just to say that that is a way that Marina was directly affected on July 7th, when the restaurants were no longer able to serve inside and when the card room was not able to function or stay open. But now we have a new suite of restrictions, as I mentioned. I think that's all I need to say, except that as Kyle brought up, there is an extension on the eviction moratorium, which was going to expire July 31st. It's been extended into the end of September, I believe, as of today in the county. And so now Brian asked the question, what about the city? And the answer is the city has to put it on our next agenda to memorialize it, and that will be July 7th. And if it has to be done before July 7th, the city manager has emergency powers to make it happen. So there's no gap between July 1st and July 7th where landlords can evict their restaurant tenants or their residential apartment or condominium or house tenants. So eviction moratorium extension, and then new restrictions for Monterey County. Does anyone have any comments on those changes to this COVID situation? And while I'll give you some time to put your hand up, there's one other thing I thought was interesting. I learned all this on a call today with the county health officer, and I asked a question about fatalities. When will they report where the fatalities are? Because wouldn't we want to know, how Marina is doing? If Marina has 17 of the 18 fatalities, that would worry me. If Marina had 0 of the 18 fatalities so far that have where people have died in this county due to COVID, that would be good news. Maybe we're doing a good job. People aren't getting so sick in Marina. And the answer to the question was that they will follow the same protocol they followed in disclosing the number of COVID positive cases by zip code and by demographics. So once there's a zip code like 93933 that has 5 or more fatalities, then they will disclose that. So far, the 18 fatalities, therefore, are not coming significantly from any one zip code, or they would start to report those. But they said they might not report them immediately when a city's zip code hit 5, because when they change something in all of their reporting information on their website, they have to change a lot of other things. So they try to batch their changes. But I think it's safe to say that Marina has 5 or fewer fatalities, hopefully 0, and that in the future, if fatalities continue to increase, we'll start to know where the hotspots are of those fatalities. And mathematics would probably predict that they're going to be a Salinas zip code because they've had such a large majority of the positive cases, et cetera. But I just thought that was something of note when we're thinking about the status of COVID in Marina and around the county. Okay, any last word on COVID before we move on? All right, the last subject today that I wanted to cover, and we're well beyond 7:30, so if anyone needs to say goodbye, we understand. But the last thing I wanted to cover is kind of a synopsis of everything we've covered to date, and then anything new. And the topic is, what are our community desires? Normally we meet once a year to have a work plan, a retreat, to talk about our priorities and what we're going to do this year. Are we going to put an emphasis more on streets than we have in the past? Are we going to try to improve the look of our downtown? Are we going to go after a fireworks policy? Are we going to go after systemic racism or other Black Lives Matter policies? Are we going to try to get rid of more of the abandoned buildings on Fort Ord? Where do we put our money and our time differently than we're already doing? Or should we just continue as we were? We didn't have that retreat. We didn't have that work plan discussion this year because we were delayed by other priorities and then by COVID. And so once in a while, or I should say daily, we get complaints either on Nextdoor, or I get them on Facebook, or people call me, or I get emails saying we need to do something about this, or we need to do something about that. And anytime that we try to do something about something new, it's going to take our time and resources away from what we're already doing. And so the question I want to put out to you is, where do you think we should put our efforts more than we're already putting them? Understanding that our plates are full. So, if something gets added or intensified that's already on our plate or added to our plate, something else is going to have to be, reduced in the attention that it receives. So examples are the ones I kind of mentioned. I don't think I need to go over them again, but what do you all think? Where are we doing poorly? We should be doing better. And is that important enough to realign our priorities and our work plan? Okay, we'll go to Danielle and then Grace.
I apologize, I'm talking so much. I'll try to make this very quick. I think as we move into the school year, we are facing a lot of big decisions related to safety and childcare, and lots of very difficult decisions about keeping teachers and staff safe as they are higher risk than children in the school system, and kind of the realities of trying to have children be compliant with safety rules that seem nearly impossible for them to do so. So I just think that, I don't know the answer of like what we should do, but I think that that is a topic that hasn't been a major focus in these discussions, but potentially could be. Thank you.
All right, let's talk about that a little bit, because the superintendent of schools, Deneen Gus, was on the call today, and I asked her that question: what's the status of the schools districts? So the superintendent of Monterey County Schools doesn't have control over what happens in any one school district. Each school district is independent. They have to follow state law, but they're independent from the cities, they're independent from the county, and they're even independent from the Monterey County's superintendent of schools. When you're talking about school districts, there are some schools that fall within her purview, Deneen Gus's purview as our superintendent, but most schools that we know of, Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, for instance, is its own separate entity to a large degree. And I asked, what's going on with the start dates? Are certain school districts aware of when they're going to start? And if they're aware of when they're going to start, have they already figured out if they're going to have a hybrid model of distance learning and brick and mortar learning? Or are they going to be staggering, where the first graders come in on Mondays and Wednesdays, and the second graders come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, some kind of a staggered cohort model? Her response was that some schools, such as Washington Union and Alisal, have already gotten their start dates, which are sometime in early August, and they've already got their plans, what model they're going to use. And some schools don't yet have their start dates or their plans. And there was a lot of discussion about research around the world. Research in Australia and research, I think, in the Netherlands shows that kids can transmit COVID from one student to another more easily than previously thought. But the push to open schools is based upon other studies that say that there's a very low risk of children passing COVID from one school student to another, and that the concern, according to those studies, is that the students will pass it to their teachers, and the teachers will pass it to each other. So it's to protect the adults that the kids need to stay away from each other, so that they don't, asymptomatically pass this virus into the teachers from each other. And so some of these schools are going to require kids to wear face masks. I'm sorry. What do you call those larger plastic see-through things? I hear you. I see your lips, Carissa, but I don't hear your lips. Oh. A shield, yeah. So I think to find out what any school district is doing, when are they going to open, and how are they going to protect their students, and how are they going to protect their staff, I think you have to go to each district's website, because everybody is doing it basically a unique way. I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, but everyone's doing it differently. So the superintendent of schools is encouraging all the schools and school districts to have a distance learning plan should at any time they be forced to shut down brick and mortar, or if they choose to start with distance learning only. They should have a hybrid plan, how they would implement that, and they should have a plan for sports, assemblies, and higher risk activities that won't come right away. Those will be the last things to happen, but she's encouraging them to start planning for that. Yeah, that's basically what I learned. And then there's a lot of consternation among teachers and staff at schools about the testing protocols. So how often do students get tested? Do students get tested? And if someone is positive, how do you handle that? So testing protocols are not yet set and have a lot of controversy behind them. Basically, the fear around that is being driven by staff that are afraid if the protocols for testing aren't adequate, then the protection inside the schools is not going to be adequate. All right, so thanks, Danielle. Did you have more to say after opening that can of worms?
Nothing specific, but thank you for that overview.
Yeah, I feel sorry for everybody in schools. It's so complicated and so much of a pressure cooker, where moms and dads want to go back to work, and some parents won't send their kid to a school if they're not going to wear a mask. Some parents won't send their school if they're going to be required to wear a mask. And so it's that typical issue of trying to make everybody happy. And it's very difficult, especially in the schools. Okay, Grace, go ahead.
So Bruce, a while back, I think it's in a meeting in July, you all were supposed to go over your 2019, 2020, and 2021 work plan priorities, which is like a list of 63. Is that still on a upcoming agenda? Because what we want and what we have to do are two entirely different things, or can often be two entirely different things. People may not really appreciate and understand what a general plan update is, but it's clearly a very important thing that needs to get accomplished. The downtown vitalization, I think in a meeting not too long ago, there was a discussion about Starbucks wanting to go in where Burger King is. And even though we don't have yet the adopted downtown plan, they're going to have to do their own specific plan. And Dana Cleary was reminding me that she was one of the first to have to do that with the Chispa Joy Junsei apartment complex. And that was like 2012. So those aren't glamorous projects for the city, but they're critical and they're expensive. So if you could just let us know what's going to be happening with this work plan priority list. Thanks.
Yeah, you can understand, Grace, how frustrated professional staff get when they understand what you just said, that general plans and downtown redevelopment plans, other policy documents underlie the ability to make progress on everything else that is sexy and obvious. But the public and the city council and me as mayor, I often get sidetracked for good reason, but Black Lives Matter, Martin Luther King are great examples of well-intended, probably important matters that completely derail staff. Revising the cannabis ordinance, let's say that it was terrifically needed, or, very essentially needed. It probably is not as important as a general plan, but it took a lot of Matt's time. Scooters, when our assistant city manager got hired a couple of years ago, he spent his first few months focused on scooters. And nobody would guess that should be on an equal level, but council, including me, wanted him to figure that out because we thought of it as an opportunity to have more of an university influence and get people out of their cars, get more kids downtown spending money. And so we went down the rabbit trail of scooters, went through a couple of iterations, and we don't have scooters, but we spent a lot of time on scooters. So to directly answer your question, we had a work plan retreat scheduled a few times, and it was canceled each time. And then we had a budget process, which made a little effort at looking at those work priorities as it regarded the budget specifically. And so we realized that those 61, 63 priorities you mentioned, some of them had already been accomplished. Some of them are happening whether we want to or not, and really shouldn't make us think that it's a discretionary item. For example, the building permits for new houses going up, that's one of our priorities. But that is just something that happens in the planning and public works department regardless. So if you whittled it down to those that have already been done and cross those off, and those like Sea Haven housing development and cross those off, we probably end up with about 40 discretionary projects that we don't have to do, like the general plan, but we should do. The general plan is required every 20 or so years, and most cities don't make it that often. And it's to their own peril that they don't do it. So the direct answer to your question, there is no agenda date certain to go over our work plan. And it's just because we've been, in a washing machine of energy with COVID, Black Lives Matter, and these other things. The cannabis ordinance review, which wasn't in our sights or our radar for a while until recently, and the Martin Luther King Jr. art. Speed limits took 2 or 3 meetings, and usually they have one meeting and there's no controversy. So it seems as if everything we touch, I think for good and for bad, gets public input, especially since we have Zoom meetings. People are more easily involved, and that's a good thing, but it does slow things down the more people are involved. But the direct answer to your question is we have no date for a public works or a public set workshop on our priorities. So one of my points putting on the agenda tonight is to start thinking about it, because we do need to do it. And by doing this tonight, it's going to allow me to be more focused on the need for it and some of your thoughts. And if nobody here had anything that they cared about, I'd probably not care so much myself. But if we hear a lot tonight where people think we really do need to get our act together as far as what are we going to do and what we're not going to do, that means something too. And I'm more of the thinking, and you probably are as well, Grace, that we should have a plan. If we don't have a plan, we're more likely to stray from what's really important.
Bruce, if I may, real quick, I thought I had heard a city council member specifically asked to have it come back in July and to have some additional information on the chart you all had. I think they wanted to see some numbers, some actual budget numbers. Maybe, as you said, if there's a number of these things that have already been accomplished, then just get them off the list. So maybe I didn't hear that council member correctly.
Yeah, so there might be a briefer look at what we're doing than the deep look that we usually do every year. I don't think it's going to be on the July 21st agenda, because we do have the cannabis ordinance, and that's going to take quite a bit of time. So I think what we need and what we've done in the past is a standalone date where that's all we do, because that's a good 3-hour discussion, and that's, I don't think, going to happen on July 21st. But I haven't talked to the city manager yet about the July 21st agenda, but I don't think it's a deep dive into our work plan. But if I'm wrong, I'll let you know, Grace. Carissa. We're playing cat and mouse, Carissa. Okay, I'm going to stop. You try. There you go.
Okay. So although I appreciate Grace bringing up a priority list, I think that in a time like now, this is a moment of sort of like global crisis, and it's time to reprioritize the list that was probably around before. COVID has highlighted the severe racial injustices in our country, and including in our county and our city. So I think that it's good to be organized, and I'm OCD. I work off of lists, and I hate having to change my lists and everything. But I also think that when the city council does look at the priority list, it's going to have to shift and change significantly, probably, just because of the time that we're in right now. And I did want to say, okay, so I sent a Google Doc that just talks about a lot of the different things that we've been discussing recently. And it's like maybe 10 bullet points, and they all are surrounding the racial justice issues. But I just thought when it comes to that, we do need to get more organized and figure out what's like top priorities, what to tackle first, and sort of do it almost like one thing at a time when we approach city council. Because I think we're like all of us are figuring this out right now and what needs to happen first, you know. And I also wanted to say, if we're talking about what issues we need to be discussing and focusing on, the other thing is the homelessness, because it's going to increase in the coming months. You know, a lot of us are struggling financially, and anybody that's already on the edge is going to get pushed over the edge. So I know that the eviction ban was, what is it? It ends in September now. And then you talked about a contingency plan. I'm not sure where that went, if there was follow through with that.
Okay, so everything you just mentioned, Carissa, is exactly the point of why we're talking about that you're right, the priorities were before COVID. And so do we need to shake them up? You know, we don't know if we need to shake them up until we have a discussion about shaking them up. But if we did shake them up, I think it would be because we want to put money and time into a racism study and doing something about it. Money and time into the police manual change, which we've never been involved with before, as we discussed earlier, as a council, as a public. If you want to do more for the homeless, that's a new direction. And so these new directions are going to take time and money away from our current directions. And so we need to have that discussion. The contingency plan might sort of take care of itself. And this was discussed during one of our recent council meetings, where our finance director said, yes, the world may go to heck in a handbasket on July 31st if several things happen, which might happen, such as unemployment insurance be reduced or go away, the eviction moratoriums expire without being extended, which that now has not happened. But anyway, July 31st was a perfect storm of potential problems that would result in people being homeless, being desperate. And so what were we going to do about it? Contingency plan was to start thinking ahead of time about August 1st, rather than begin August 1st or August 7th when people are already in that desperation mode. The answer to that question from our finance director was that we have learned a lot in the last 3 months as far as outreaching to businesses and outreaching to residents, knowing how to talk to them, knowing how to find them, knowing how to contact them, and more importantly, having a model program, which is basically the city council giving money to loans, and those loans are helping people out of their desperate situations, but they have to pay the loans back. And he said that that program of loans is a beauty because it's scalable. We could change it. We could make it be, half grant, half loans, but it's not a lot of effort to tweak or expand or continue that program. And if you think about it, he might be right, because what do people need when they're desperate? Usually they need money for rent, money for bills, money for food, money for doctors, whatever. It usually boils down to they're in trouble because they can't afford to do what they need. And then it's a question of how much money do we take out of our general fund, and how do we give it? And who do we give it to? And do we give it as a loan? Do we give it as a grant? Some hybrid? But his point was just, fortunately, we might have an easy time, and that might be the whole of our contingency plan, other than making those final decisions about how to tweak what we've already got to accommodate whatever August brings us. But now that you've heard that, Carissa, what do you think? Do you think there's more that needs to go into a contingency plan than what I've said?
Oh boy, I don't know. Like for us specifically, I like hearing the idea of the hybrid grant loans, because initially that's what the government was saying for small businesses. They were going to offer a loan that was then forgiven if it was used for specific things. And that's what my husband and I were hoping to get, because we have a small business. And then the resources ran out and it was not available to us. And then we were excited to see that Marina was doing loans, but then you still have to pay them back, which I understand completely. We're not a rich city. But yeah, if you have like the hybrid grant where a grant is a portion of the loan, I think that is very valuable to people. Other than that, I don't know. Yeah, I just was curious to hear what your thoughts were on how to tackle it.
Okay. And as far as work plan, if we do on July 21st or some near date have a discussion about work priorities, that plan on how that program and how to help people is a work priority. You know, it's either a low priority or it's a high priority or a medium or something like that. So it's not the last time we'll talk about that. So thanks for bringing it up. Just want to catch up a little bit before we go to Enid, that Karen said that alternative services to policing, degrees in social work might become the next hot field. Karen, do you want to speak to that? Because I kind of chopped it up trying to read what your intention was.
I don't know what's at Cal State Monterey Bay in terms of social work programs or where you can get a master's in social work close by, but that is a field that I think really could be hot. And when a previous speaker, I guess it was Kathy, talking about having people available 24/7, the experience is that the people with the least experience or least seniority get the worst shifts, and they don't last there long. They're going to look for better places or places that fit their lifestyle better. There's some people who really thrive on that 2 to midnight shift or whatever, but that overnight shift is a real tough one. But anyway, that was my thought. Social work, for those people who aren't so into science, the other sciences, could be a really good field, a growth field.
Okay, let's ask Danielle in a moment to give us her sense. And Enid is telling us you can get an MSW at CSUMB. Those are a couple of acronyms there. But Enid, let's go to Enid and then we'll go to Danielle because Enid's had her hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Sorry, Danielle. I always want to listen to Danielle. She's way smarter. I just wanted to say that going back to the schools, which Danielle brought up, I've just been thinking a lot about, and whether people are deciding to send their kids to school or not. I think, everyone should be really nice to each other because it's just a really hard time to be a parent. And I'm wondering if this is an opportunity for us to think about alternative systems of support for children and families, especially if we end up online in a few weeks, which, science points to that's going to be happening, and if there are ways to figure out, and this maybe doesn't cost anything, but just like there may be families who can take care of other families' children or help them with schooling who could be remunerated for that, right? Either by the families that are still working or by some kind of social program. But it'd be really neat for our community to kind of think about this as an opportunity, because this has always been a problem. This has always been a childcare desert, as an opportunity to support, families collaboratively solving this problem. That's all.
So if you had families helping families, you'd be pushing into that social circle idea of COVID, whereas right now families couldn't help families because they have to be isolated from one another.
Yeah. So, I'm just wondering about like if we're talking about, the basically testing and tracing is where it was in March where we shut down. We don't really have systems in place to support things in the way that we had hoped we would, right? And we're going into the autumn with a great many children whose parents are working in our community and they can't stop working. We also have parents in our community who may be able to provide care or schooling support. And kind of, I'm just wondering if there's a way, not that the city council would get involved, but at least to facilitate some kind of discussion or network so that we could think about alternative models. And maybe that's something that we could carry into the future after COVID and be like, oh yeah, we learned this great thing. We want to keep doing it. So that way it's not so impossible for families to get childcare and educational support.
So before we turn it over to Danielle, the city could help. I mean, money often helps.
Yeah,
So
money's
this,
good.
yeah. So the city could say, instead of loaning $100,000 or $300,000 to residents, we will loan residents $150,000, and we'll put $150,000 into childcare, or we'll put $150,000 into some other way of helping Marina people handle this crisis of work and childcare. So it kind of sometimes boils down to money. And if we're trying to help residents and businesses where we've never done that in the past, give money in any fashion. We had a revolving loan once, a small business loan, and it didn't work out because the businesses didn't repay the loan, so we ran out of the revolving dollars. But there wasn't a very big program. Essentially, we haven't ever helped businesses and residents like we have lately. And so that help could be expanded, and that could be part of a contingency plan that Carissa and I weren't thinking of, and that our city council hasn't thought of until now, is like helping directly with childcare expenses, either having our, go ahead.
It results in also income to the families who maybe, are able to do that and weren't getting other income, because a lot of people are not. The other thing the city could do would be to make outdoor public spaces like city parks available to do things like, I could see doing an outdoor art class where I go set up stuff for kids 6 feet apart. They show up, we do some art, they take everything with them, I don't touch anything. Those kind of outdoor spaces being available, if we are, especially if we're going back into a shelter in place and we have children who are not able to, there's some kids are really struggling with it.
Right. And so that takes money to pay the staff or the volunteers,
right,
pay for supplies, but it can be done with a little bit of money. We have, if you think about it, we've always had paid childcare before school and after school by city staff. Right. So it's not a huge stretch to pay for the same service during school hours when people need it the most to be able to keep their job and put food on the table and pay their bills.
And maybe help those kids get a little bit of a math boost from someone who's actually, better at teaching them than I am.
Mm-hmm. And we could remunerate, we could pay people for their services, maybe not $90,000 a year in benefits, but that's probably not what elementary school teachers make either. Hey, I just want to give a shout out. If you want to get your bike repaired, go to Rooster Wheels. Look at William. Look how good he is at it. If you don't know where Rooster Wheels is, it's right next to the police station, right next to City Hall, same parking lot, essentially. So go to Rooster Wheels and get all your bike needs serviced there. It's pretty fun, too. It's kind of like going to a cultural scene when you go to Rooster Wheels. He has a cult following. I'm sure I'm part of it. So what's an MSW and what's CSUMB, Enid, just to make sure we're all on the same page?
Well, I think Danielle's more qualified to answer social science questions, but a Master's of Social Work at California State University, Monterey Bay is something you can do affordably.
All right, that's a segue for Danielle, but there's a picture that William's holding up. It's a picture of him and his dog Petal, or a parrot that's playing with a ball.
A rooster.
It's a rooster kicking a little ball, like a dog toy or something. Great, perfect. Thank you, William.
Bruce, I had missed your question. I had stepped away, and then you said, Danielle can speak to that. And I was like,
you left us? I thought you were riveted on our discussion.
I was, just for a moment, just the one moment of missing your question. Could you repeat it?
Go ahead, Enid, because I forget it too.
Oh, was it just about what an MSW is?
It was about, Karen's question. Karen thinking that the next hot field was going to be social works, and more specifically, she was better than I'm saying it, that policing degrees in social work might become the next hot topic. Alternative services to policing degrees in social work, I get it now for the first time, might become the next hot field. So teaching social workers to be cops without guns, essentially, and respond to those cases that don't need guns.
I mean, I think that community approach has always been an integral part of the social work discipline. And so that is a wonderful, amazing discipline for people to do that work from. And the core of social work is already preparing those students to do it. It's a master's level degree that you can complete in 2 or 3 years. Plus then you get about 3,000 additional supervised hours of training to get your license to practice independently.
3,000 hours. Karen, did that answer your question? Or comment? It wasn't really a question.
It was really a comment about the next hot field, the way RN or nursing was a few years ago and still is actually, and everybody's going into all the allied health fields right now, occupational therapy and such, that that social work programs, I think they to some extent fit really well with distance learning, and I think if we see a big sweep across the whole country of these services like Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon offers, that the need for social workers is going to skyrocket. So yeah, it's something for young people to think about, or people thinking of going back to school.
onetonline.org is a great resource for learning about all sorts of careers, including social work.
Okay, we're gonna go to Kathy in about 30 seconds. I wanna put a plug into Enid. If you ever need art, Enid's got all the art there. You wanna buy it or borrow it or give it as a gift or commission her to do artwork for you.
I'm not planning everyone else's exhibitions, so I can do my own stuff now.
It looks like it. Yeah. Some future night you can do a 360. Let us see all of your artwork. Before Kathy starts, I want to say that next week I think we'll try to focus on muscle cars and schools. And I don't know that we'll have a guest speaker on the muscle cars. Maybe we will. But on schools, I'll try to get PK Diffenbaugh, who's our superintendent for our local school district, Monterey Peninsula Unified, and Deneen Gus, who's our superintendent for the county. Maybe we'll start with Deneen, kind of big picture, and then go to PK to hear about what Marina High School is going to be doing, and Seaside High School and Monterey High School. Or maybe we get Rebecca, the Marina High School's principal, and we just focus on Marina High School rather than MP Monterey Peninsula Unified. So I'll work through that, but we'll try to have a focus on schools and a minor focus on muscle cars so we keep Grace happy. But she's gone tonight, but she'll be back. Okay, Kathy. Thanks for being patient. Can't hear you yet, but we're working on it, Kathy.
Okay,
Go
great.
ahead.
Okay, so going back to what Carissa was saying in terms of priorities, I think if we just looked at the foremost right now, priority is about the COVID-19, for example, and that sort of defines all the other tentacles of this, because I want everyone to imagine our marina life 6 months from now, another 6 months. If this thing doesn't get solved by a vaccine, we're looking at a year in which we have to figure out, with our limited resources, our current budget, our current state of affairs getting worse, and then what are we left with? So if I look back at what Carissa, you're talking about homelessness, and I know Bruce was saying this is something we struggled with for a long time, and it's a really difficult thing to get your arms around, but we're talking about new homelessness. And so directly coming out of COVID, and maybe that's a different issue, and that's a different way to look at an old problem. Also, we talked about racism, which we're already talking about. But when we look at, we already know that COVID is affecting more people of color in harsher ways than other folks, right? And then let's say we get a vaccine. Who do we think is going to get the first doses? I mean, again, that whole thing of systemic racism will be a direct result and something we have to tackle with COVID. And then we've been talking about police. Okay, so if we think that as people continue to lose their jobs, continue to not have homes and stuff, what do you think is going to happen to the crime levels? And again, if we don't solve the issue of Black Lives Matter with criminal justice, what is that going to have the direct impact again because of COVID? And then Enid, I think, was bringing up about the schools. Even with COVID now, shelter in place, I have a friend who's a school teacher, and what is being reported is some really higher levels of abuse of children, both violence and sexual abuse. And so we need to look at that whole thing too as a direct result of COVID. And those are huge projects. And I know that, we've got 63 other priorities, but looking directly and centering around COVID, I think is a good kind of focal point for us. And
Kathy, can I interrupt you, Kathy?
Yeah.
what can the city do about physical abuse and sexual abuse in the home?
Well, here is what some of the folks have been talking about looking at different programs that could be either paid for. But I think that what I've seen about Marina is that we are fantastic with organizing and volunteer and civic duty. And there may come up a time when we can't just say, well, the city has to pay for it. We may have to go back to the old kind of way of helping and getting through crises as a community. And that means maybe people organize ways in which we can do art in the park classes, or people can do Zoom, hour classes for people through the school to supplement, or helping people with homework or whatever it is. But the sort of this civically minded volunteers begin to think about those creative ways of how we're going to help our community when there is no more money, when there is not a lot of other resources. And I think that we can call upon ourselves to do things that maybe we haven't thought of before. And so I think that the whole volunteer kinds of things, and if we can pay them, we should, but at the same time, there's so much creativity in our community, and we might have to start kind of going back to old school. How do you help your neighbors when they're in need? And I think we can start organizing and doing things, and every little bit is going to help. 6 months from now, a year from now, when things are going to be a whole lot worse.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. So I'm trying to see what's the punchline there of how does the city help? Because you talked about how volunteers in the old-fashioned way can help, but I don't remember what you said about the city helping.
Well, in any of those other priorities, the homelessness, the racism.
No, I mean about physical abuse and sexual abuse in the home.
Oh, okay. Well, helping to pull out the children in other ways from the house, or through Zoom or something, so that they are occupied and they are not running around the house, unstructured and creating more stress for parents that might be at the edge and then get into abuse, if that's one of the reasons. But helping to fill in that void where the parents are at home all day long with these children, and sometimes many children in the same household. So
city programs, kind of like what we're already doing, but much more as expanded as needed.
Yes,
until it works.
Including more volunteers too, and not being so insular, because I think we're going to need all hands on deck.
Right. So you can see the conflict between COVID protocol and getting kids out of the house, right?
No, I'm just suggesting what Enid was saying. You could do that in the park, and if there were strict, kind of rules about that certainly would be, something that could. And things are changing so rapidly. If we go back to school, for example, my God, there's something to be said of that. And right now, yes, if it says shelter in place, by God, we should be doing shelter in place. So I'm not suggesting these kinds of things that would be against, but there are things that we could start thinking about. I'm already starting to think about when restaurants reopen again, because the thing that I have struggled with, and I said this before to you and others, is we never address the issue of when people eat, they take off their masks. And so when you say people can go back to dining in, but you don't cover that. And I've read every single document put out for restaurants, and nobody's covering that. It's like, oh my God, we're making a mistake, guys. So I'm saying that there are things that evolve and that we learn, and we get better at things. So that's what we have to do in this case. So none of us can make a suggestion and think, geez, that's going to be the panacea for everything. It's not. But as things change and we learn and we start thinking about new ways to do stuff, and I think that could be a partnership with the city and the residents of Marina. It shouldn't be the burden of just the city, is my thought on this. Just looking towards the future.
All right. I'm going to come back to what you said after we hear from Karen. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you, Bruce and Kathy. Kathy, there are systems out there that show up for women to reach out if they're being abused. There's signals. There's sometimes they're like there's little signs in bathrooms. Are you being abused? With the date, who might be out in the restaurant or out in the bar, give a signal to the waitress, give a signal to the bartender. And could something like that be implemented for children who are distance learning with Zoom, that they could pass a signal to their teacher that, that they need a social worker intervention in their home, something like that. I mean, I don't know if that's too far out there, but there's probably people with the expertise who could do something like that. That was my thought. Back to collaboration in the communities, it makes me think of being a 4-H teacher and teaching people how to sew. And I'm looking at my clothes going, oh, well, there's certain clothes I'm wearing all the time and they're wearing out. And that only leaves me with my dress-up clothes. That's not gonna work for working at the stables. So some of the things we need around here, there's already a big garden group going on, but tinkerers and fixers and repair people at that level, that could very well be big collaborative community activities in our future.
And we have tons of that stuff going on.
But keep moving it. I think next door is helpful with the garden thing. I passed off some stuff to people and people passed off stuff to me and vice versa. And, it's out there on my porch type of stuff. So anyway, we can keep that up. But
And I just thought of a crazy idea. What if we, and I'm saying not right now, because I don't think people have been as stretched as they will be in 6 months to a year, but even pairing up residents with residents so that people can communicate and say, I'm really down today and I need this for my family and but I mean, whatever it is, I mean, that might be so way out there, but I just thought of that just as another idea. Maybe that's how Marina helps each other, is that we do something really novel so that people aren't feeling alone out there as we progress through the COVID.
Well, because of the urgency of the need, I hope that we can kind of continue this until we actually come up with something implementable during COVID, because some of what you're saying is going to be a lot easier after COVID. But what do we do during school hours to help kids get out of the house if they're distance learning? First of all, they don't have equal access to technology. So distance learning is kind of a joke for a lot of people in Marina. And second of all, distance learning is still in the home, still susceptible to abuse. And so to me, taking your ideas, it seems most important to get these outdoor COVID safe programs during school hours and maybe after school hours too, or before. But that would be the best bang for the buck, is to figure out in COVID times how to help kids in school not have to stay home and be subject to their abuse. And then once the COVID starts to relax or go away, the door is less needed and the doors are a lot more options. So I wanted to come back to share my screen, because you said something about we haven't figured out how to work in the restaurants, how to eat safely. And I wanted to share this. This is how you do it. The guy's eating a steak, drinking some wine. So don't say that we haven't fixed that problem of how to eat in a restaurant. There you go.
Quack, 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 quack. Is that somebody we know?
No, it was just a Facebook thing. It's just so funny.
Thank you. Oh my God. Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. I needed that laugh.
All right. So anybody want the final word on tonight? Any subjects? Any parting words?
Thank you.
Oh, whale
Thank
watching,
you.
please.
Thank you.
Kate Spencer, you want to talk about whale watching? Have you seen any right whales lately?
Why do you ask about right whales? No, you're not going to see any right whales. There's lots of humpbacks around, and
so if you want to go whale watching, Kate Spencer is your go-to person. Kate, go ahead.
Well, just there's a lot of whales around, and this is a good time of year, and it's an outdoor activity, and some of the companies are taking it really seriously. So get out.
So what kind of whales did you see today?
Humpbacks. There's a bunch of humpbacks around. There have been occasional sightings of Rizzo's dolphins and some other kinds of dolphins in some of the boats if they go farther offshore.
Okay, so where were the humpbacks today? What location?
They're off Marina. They're hanging out.
Marina.
They're like 3-4 miles from shore, so they're not close enough to easily see from shore, but you can see them from the boats.
Oh, that's cool. Are they affected by fireworks?
I don't think so.
Too far offshore.
No,
it'd be easy for them to avoid the fire, the explosions and stuff.
I think the gulls are the ones that are most concerned about the fireworks.
Okay, good point. So what's the name of your business, Kate?
Fast Raft. Fast as in speedy raft floating thing. Fast Raft.
Okay. Did you see any otters today?
I see otters every day. Absolutely.
How many otters did you see today? Approximately.
25.
25. Okay.
Yeah. I've run out of Moss Landing. There's lots of otters in there. There's a whole raft. I saw mother and calf humpback today too.
All right. All right. So when do you see grays? What months of the year do you see grays?
Gray whales are late December into May, and in April and May is when the mothers and calves are going northbound. So that's also when we see killer whales a lot. Humpbacks used to be seasonal, and now they are pretty much year round, but really the heavy season for humpbacks is basically March through November. So there's always, the population has quadrupled in the last 20 years. And if any of you grew up here and didn't remember seeing whales, it's because there weren't as many of them. But there's so many of them now, there's some that stay year round. So gray whales in the winter, humpbacks in the spring, summer, and fall, blue whales also possible spring, summer, and fall.
All right. How often do you see sharks, and do you see others besides great whites when you do see them?
Yeah, you do occasionally see blue sharks, salmon sharks, threshers, and great whites, makos. They're all out there. And if you really want to see sharks, some of the companies are doing regular shark tours in the little area up near Santa Cruz, where those juvenile great white sharks. Yeah, where the shark, we call it the shark park. I mean, there's a little swimming beach that's set off there. They've got buoys out that say swim area, and we're like driving our boats through going, there's another shark, there's another shark. So that's pretty funny. But yeah, it's up by New Brighton State Beach and Sea Cliff State Beach. And there's, on warm days, there's lots of sharks. So you can go out with Santa Cruz Whale Watching and Sea Spirit, both are doing regular tours up there. I've gone up there recently, when I had a long trip and people wanted to see them. It's really fun. They're cute if you like sharks.
Well, Kate, you did many years. How many years you been doing whale watching?
Almost 20 years.
20 years. So after about 18 of those years, you had some medical issues that kind of sidelined you, and now you're recovered and you're back.
Yeah, I took time out. I had surgery and I'm fine. I'm out there again.
Yeah. Well, you were looking vulnerable there for a while, as you should after surgery, and it's just great that you're back doing what you love, and you were able to recover enough to pick right back up on the whale watching tours. It's a great story.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually been it's good to be back out on the water. I wound up putting the boat in the boatyard for a while this winter, and then we're like, oh, we'll just take our time getting back to work, and then there's COVID. It's like, oh, okay.
Now, during COVID, I don't know if Kate was 100% recovered. Probably she was close anyway. She staffed a table at the first Black Lives Matter march in Marina, where she gave out food and the best kind of drinks, those Kerr's nectar juice drinks, the kind that cost like $2 in the store. So instead of giving just water out, she was giving really good drinks. So she was giving the refreshments to all the Black Lives Matter ralliers and protesters, and that was pretty cool. Thanks for doing that at Vince DiMaggio Park.
Well, you can thank Whites for Racial Equity for that, because I collected donations from a whole bunch of people and just went wild in Costco and got all kinds of good stuff. And I think that stuff is going to show up at a few more protests too, because got so many donations, got a lot of it.
Yeah. So Whites for Racial Equity, you say?
Yes, it's a group that was started by some folks at the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Monterey Peninsula and some colleagues of theirs. And it's been going for several years with discussion groups, book readings, videos, just a lot of inquiry and discussion and examination and self-education. And
has their activity spiked with Black Lives Matter? They have more to do. Are they more, and they're more inspired to do it? Or are they still on an even keel as what they were before Black Lives Matter?
There is a weekly newsletter of activities that sort of ranges the whole area, draws in things that were, activities from UC Santa Cruz and all over the place, that anybody can get on that mailing list if you want to. Just look for whitesforracialequity.org. There's a very good website. And it's also got a fantastic list of resources, books, movies, all that kind of stuff. As far as whether there's more activity, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of kicked into gear, and since I know them and I've been to some of the activities, I just went, hey, y'all want to sponsor me to do this? So I just sort of took it on.
Right on. That's great, Kate.
Yeah, and there are definitely, I mean, they already had a really full
agenda. Yeah, I've heard a lot about them, but I wanted to know their exact name so I could send them a thank you card. So I'll go on their website and find out their address.
Yeah, there's also a Facebook group. There's a Facebook group that actually has sort of exploded during Black Lives Matter. I don't know. It sort of got out. It's no longer just a local group. There's people all over the country writing in.
And Kate, who is the president or the chair of that group right now?
I don't even know what the organizational structure is, but JT Mason is one of the principals, and Anita Crawley, and what's her name, who works at CSUMB, and I'm going to forget it, but she works in diversity and inclusion.
Is it Vanessa?
I don't think so.
She might have been at the CSUMB Black Lives Matter rally, Karen, that you went to. Is she African American? No, she's has to be white. Right?
Yeah, have to be.
Yeah. And I should mention too that some of the activities and some of the discussions are for white people only, and some are for everybody. So it's not exclusive.
What a racist group that is.
No.
Gotta be white to participate. Whites only? Wow, I remember those days.
No, can I say, everyone, that I've recently talked with Carolyn Haskell, and
that's who I'm thinking of.
Oh, is that her? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes, and she is fabulous, and she wrote this wonderful book called Combined Destinies, and it's really worth reading. It's it's from the white perspective of how racism has affected the white population, and really compelling little vignettes. It's really a great read, and it kind of goes into another part that I think we forget when we talk about diversity, and so it's really a pretty I think a dynamic group, and she's absolutely a dynamic person. So pick up that book.
With Ann Todd.
Oh, Ann Todd, and Jealous, I think.
Right? Todd
Yeah,
Jealous.
yeah.
So it has two perspectives really through it. Yeah.
What are the two perspectives, Enid?
Well, Ann Todd Jealous is also a civil rights activist who comes from the Black community.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Can you start over?
Ann is a civil rights activist who comes from the Black community. And so Caroline and Ann collaborated to kind of look at the intersectional and differences in different ways that the double-edged sword of racism affects people. And Ann lives in Pacific Grove also, so does Caroline, and her son is Ben Jealous, who was the head of the NAACP and is now the head of a new org that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. Maybe someone else knows.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's like super cool. It's Monterey County, and it's really...
I know, it's just wonderful.
In 1994, I was a student in Breakthrough, and Fred Jealous and Todd Jealous, his wife, founded it, and he's still leading it in a certain way. And he's a great person. I met Ann through Fred, but that Breakthrough men's group, and then they started an analogous Break Free women's group, and it's pretty great programs, both of them.
I'm a graduate of Break Free too.
Who said that?
Kate.
Kate, hi,
HSC
Kate.
Otter.
I heard the voice and I didn't see the lips. That's from today?
It's not.
Little.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a pup on a mom?
Yes.
Yeah. I couldn't tell if it looks like a bat on a mom. They look a lot like bats. Gailey said, thank you. Some great discussions tonight. She's been working on making jam and plum crumble while everyone's been talking. And then Rooster William said he extends an invitation to everyone who wishes to post flyers or information. They can bring them to Rooster Wheels. We are an essential business with a lot of foot traffic. Thank you, William.
Wonderful.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. It was a great evening again. Wouldn't be so great without every one of you joining us. Carissa, go ahead. You're muted, but let's get you unmuted. Go ahead. I think you're going to be
okay.
unmuted. Yeah.
Somebody watching that I've been communicating with was asking for Anne's full name if Enid has it.
Anne Todd, T-O-D-D, Jealous, Jelous.
Does Anne have an E on it?
No, not that I know of. Oh wait, look, she's holding it up.
Oh
no, I don't see names on it.
Wait, where's the name?
She's my favorite. At the top. Check. I'll just look on Facebook really quick. Anne,
got it. Todd, yeah. Jealous. Cool.
No hyphen.
I've never heard the last name Jealous.
T-O-D-D and then Jealous, like it sounds. Fred Jealous, husband. Ben Jealous, son.
Yeah, no E on the end of Anne.
Yeah, they're kind of like a quiet powerhouse in our area. Not quiet in their world, but quiet outside their world.
No idea Ben Jealous was from here or about that book. So thank you for enlightening me on both. Both are really cool.
Yeah. And he ran for governor in New Jersey?
No, it was in Maryland.
Maryland, same thing. That's about as much as I know about the East Coast.
You're getting close to my hometown there. That's finally changing its stupid football
Redskins?
team name.
Washington Redskins. No more.
Hey. And people are mad about it.
Now, how about the Cleveland Indians? Are they going to follow suit?
They'd better. That mascot is the worst.
Or the Kansas City Chiefs? I haven't heard anything about them the last few weeks. They do this thing, this hack thing.